Guys, I'm very excited to be joined today for our Women in Construction series by Gina Koert. Gina is the co-founder of Bell SPI, a commercial painting company in Denver, Colorado. I met Gina through another entrepreneur, Maggie Kuiper, based in Nashville, who also owns Harpeth Painting. And she said, you got to meet Gina because Gina is so awesome. She is a phenomenal leader. She is committed to being the very best entrepreneur that she can. And when I first met Gina, we just hit it off. She is such a delight to talk to. She is so friendly, so forthcoming, but so grounded. Despite monumental growth in their business, she is just the most humble, engaging person you could ever imagine. And I was super excited she agreed to be a part of the Women in Construction series, and I can't wait for you to meet her. So let's dive in and let's meet Gina Koert. Gina, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. I have to say I was on the phone with Maggie yesterday and told her that we were having this conversation, and she was so excited. Talk about a positive ripple that she created here for us getting to know one another, and I'm so grateful that she agreed to be a part of this series.
Thank you
I
for having me.
well, yeah, of course. I mean, you are a successful entrepreneur, and I know that you kind of took a unconventional route to doing what you do today. So why don't you give our audience just a little taste of, your company and sort of your career path that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I own a second generation painting business. We do all commercial and light industrial in Denver, Colorado, and we've kind of spread our wings. We work a little bit outside of the area. But it was started by my father in the early '90s. And so the fun trajectory is I'd never planned to work in the family business. In fact, I didn't want to work in the family business. I went to college to not work in the family business. Yet here I am.
Yeah,
So, right, how
payback.
everything kind of comes full circle.
That's right.
Um, my interests, I really enjoyed writing. I loved architecture. So I originally wanted to pursue architecture. I ended up, getting a minor, and then I ultimately just kind of did business and did international communications. My dream job when I was younger was I wanted to write for architectural magazine, Digest, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to do something in that space. So right out of college, I started working for a magazine called Colorado Homes and Lifestyles. Quickly learned I felt like I had a paid homework assignment, and it took up all your time going to these events with like very little ROI,
Yeah.
outside of the social aspect. So I learned pretty quickly like it looked a lot sexier than it was.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't really for me. So then I rerouted. I moved to DC for a while, and I did cost consulting, which is kind of a fancy title for estimating.
Yep.
I worked
Yep.
for a UK company, doing the consulting for all the finishes,
Okay.
structural, architectural, things like that. So after I graduated, I went out there. Never had lived on the East Coast. I'm originally from West Coast, but went to high school, college, and now I currently reside still in Colorado. But so it's kind of taken me all over. But I did that and got to travel. I was pricing US embassies, really had a lot of fun, learned it was a
Wow.
work hard, play hard kind of environment for
Yeah.
my mid to late 20s. And then when I wanted to settle down, I miss skiing. I love the outdoors of Colorado growing up in it. So before I got married and had kids, I moved back. And my dad approached me and said, what are your thoughts about joining the family business again or taking over? So we had a lot of long conversations that led up to that because I didn't want it to feel like I was going backward or was just sacrificing going back to where I started.
Right.
And it was something that I really wanted to do. So I moved back and started working for the business long before I took ownership for it. I was project manager, estimator, working with general contractors. Um, and then slowly kind of moved into different roles in kind of leadership and executive roles. And then at one point bought my dad out of the minority shares, switched it to a woman-owned business. And then last year, when my dad retired, we sold minority shares to my current partner, who's a UK company.
That's well, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, number one, I guess the first question I have is, what was it about looking at the family business kind of the second time that really kind of convinced you that, hey, maybe this is something that I could do. Maybe this is an area that I want to invest my time and professional talents.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I think really the top answer is opportunity.
Yeah.
And then for me, it was the quality of life and balance. So when I was in kind of really the rat race, especially in a big metropolitan city like DC, New York, I mean, you basically are passing the baton from coffee to a mimosa or, something from happy hour. I mean, there's no downtime, there's no
Yeah.
freedom. It is truly a work hard, play hard environment, which I think it's not a one size fits all. I definitely enjoyed it at that period of my life, but it wasn't sustainable.
Yeah.
And so coming back to the family business, there is a lot of opportunity to be a free thinker and want to try things. Whether you own the business or you do work for somebody who's a family, you don't necessarily have to be the owner or be a family business. But I just think that there's a lot more opportunity there. There are definitely structured processes and procedures, but there's a little more flexibility. Or you have strategy meetings where people can come in with ideas saying, I've worked here for so long, we've always done it this way. I think this way could be better. And instead of there being this long corporate process or,
Yeah.
no, that's just not how we do it, there's a lot more optimism and just that opportunity to say, yeah, let's go for it. So that was ultimately the driving force, because not everything that I made my decisions on came with a dollar sign. I didn't just say,
Sure.
okay, where's the most money being made? It was really opportunity for me, especially at that point in my life when I was coming into my 30s.
Yeah. I love that. What is it that you learned about the time in DC doing what you were doing that really helped maybe inform how you approach your business today, either good or bad?
I was hired for a job that, quite honestly, I was underqualified for at the time. And so I rose to the occasion.
Yeah.
I had great mentors, but it was very stressful. I mean, when you're presenting project proposals to the State Department for man camps in Iraq, you don't want to miss $1 million mistake. And I
Yeah.
did,
Yep.
and then you've got to come back and explain why that is. And so high reward, but high stress.
Sure.
Definitely a big learning curve. I think it really set a foundation for when I came back. These big projects with GCs don't scare me because I had to go sit and, propose something to the State Department of a
Yeah.
cost. So everything was definitely very relative in the step to my progression. But I also learned that I just wasn't poised for the pace of the East Coast. While people who, having come from a different coast, just being more outdoors, while I loved it and the opportunity and I had friends and dating and a great apartment and all the things, I just ultimately knew that it wasn't long term for me. It was kind of a stepping stone in my career path. But the takeaways were great because the opportunity, again, at that point, I couldn't have gotten into family business, right? So
Yep.
if you reverse engineer that, I got to travel. I was in Egypt. I was in Bern, Switzerland. I got to work on embassies, things that were really outside of anything that I would have had an opportunity to. So then when you bring it back, it really puts things in perspective and it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So, I mean, that was really a big takeaway for me.
I think one of the things that you just mentioned, though, I think that really strikes me as really incredible is that you were able to sort of leverage that experience, but at the same time had enough self awareness to know, yeah, this is great, but it's not what I want, and it's not, it's great for right now, but it's not like the, where I want to go with my career path. So, was there one thing that sort of kind of spurned you to look elsewhere and then eventually come back to Colorado and work with your dad? Or was it kind of just a realization over a period of time that was like, hey, this is fun, but at some point I'm gonna need to shift gears and do something different.
Right. It was a realization over a period of time. I didn't necessarily know that the end game outcome would be kind of circling back where I started working for a business that my father originally started. Um, I did like working on the owner side. Obviously, construction GC work is what they often refer to as the dark side, right? And
Yeah.
then subcontractors is like a whole nother tier.
Yep.
So it was fun because getting to see the owner side. I've never worked for a general contractor, but I worked so closely with them for the last 20 years that, I have a lot of friends in the industry on that side. So it kind of put it all together for me.
Yep.
I didn't know, honestly, for a while if I wanted to stay in construction, because it is very male centric.
Yeah.
It can definitely wear you down. You've got to have thick skin in certain scenarios. You've really got to know numbers. You really have to know either, what the service or the sale is, what the project is. You've got to be detail oriented. I mean, there's a lot of requirements that if you're not strong in one particular area, you've got to have discipline to work on it. I mean, I'm constantly reading different books.
Yep.
I'm listening to podcasts. I'm trying to, better myself. And really the question is starting with the why, right? That was actually a book I read a while
Yep.
ago too, is start with why, because you've got to know why you're doing it, or you can't just show up to work just for, like I said earlier, the money or whatever, or it just isn't sustainable. You'll get burnout, especially in construction. I know
Sure.
plenty of men after they, their wives started having kids and they had a family, that like the burnout rate because of the hours or some of the demands were just a lot. And even them,
Yeah.
they're like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to go work for some residential company. Commercial construction has also really changed. The landscape has changed over the last 5, 6 years. It's gotten very competitive. At least in my trade coming towards the end, it's getting stacked. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more challenges and stress than there ultimately was. So yeah, I mean, it was navigating that. I didn't necessarily plan it, but everything kind of has fallen into its own place. And I just trust timing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And, obviously, you know, we were introduced by a mutual friend who's also in the same space as you. But the thing that she had mentioned to me about you is that you are a rock star committed to learning and being as good as you possibly can at what you do. And that was evident when you and I talked. And obviously you just shared that. I want the audience to hear that, because it is your point there is that you can't just take it for the money. You can't just necessarily do it for the job. You kind of have to be passionate about it. But the construction industry opens up a plethora of opportunity, especially for women, as the industry is changing. What's your thoughts there? What do you see, or what advice would you give maybe a young woman that's thinking about, or someone that's maybe even shifting careers, why construction
Mhm.
would be the space to look at and why there's opportunity for women there?
Yeah. I think the first thing that any woman, I mean, and really any man should it's the clarity of it,
Yeah.
right? You've got to kind of co-architect what you're doing. I think so many times and often when I interview, and I've looked at hundreds of resumes for different roles in my company now over the last decade. Um, I see like a lot of non-commitment where it's a year here, 2 years, or even less than a year places.
Yeah.
Job hopping has become more of a culturally accepted thing than I think it certainly was when I was in the job market early on in the last 20 years. And some of the responses I get is, they're trying to figure out what they want. And some of them are vastly different. I mean, they'll go from, something in electrical all the way to I want to be a chef, and then they're back to construction. Right. And while there's
Yep.
nothing wrong with that, I think you could save yourself a lot of time and energy, and, unless you want that self-discovery, with some clarity, starting with clarity. And then when you get that, honing in your skills, having a little bit of the insight, some sort of a strategy, right? That doesn't change. There's nothing magic about it. It's that discipline of kind of, again, asking the why. It's start with why. Why am I doing this? My why for a while when I was a little uncertain was I wanted balance.
Yeah.
So at some point, yes, money did come into play and it mattered, because I'm not going to, I don't want to work on a shoestring salary forever when you're trying to build a life or buy your first home. I get that. But some people want to come in with like 2 years of experience, and I look at it in months, 24 months of experience,
Yep.
want over 6 figures to match somebody who's maybe been in the industry for 10 years, and have this entitled kind of attitude like, well, it's open and I'm owed that and I went to school. And really, there's nothing that can replace real world experience or knowledge. Because I have some killers and some hustlers that work for me that are younger. And the reality is when I put them in tough situations, they handle it to the best of their ability. But the reality is they only have 29 or 30 years worth of life, and
Yeah.
probably a good solid 5 to 7 years worth of like experience that will really give them the backbone to know this is the right approach. Right. So it's nothing against them. And so there's nothing to be said for that. So I think it's clarity. So when a woman can come and sit at the table and either has that experience or has that knowledge, there's nothing that's more of a wow factor to really anyone, whether you're a man, you're a woman, really
Yeah.
anyone. When you spend the time, you hone in your skill set, you know what you're doing, obviously you're ethical, because integrity to me means a lot. I think that there's a lot of assumptions with women climbing the ladder, whether it's in construction or other places, that we got there other than just our skill set.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a bygone generation assumption, but I still come up face to face with it at times. Um, so I think it's finding that clarity. There's so many opportunities, whether you like the mechanical side or you like, what I do in the finishing side, where it's more, the wallpaper, the painting, the finishing, the colors. You get to work with the interior designers, or the structural, building all of the actual backbone of these buildings. I think it's just, there's so much opportunity. There's so many trade schools. My son recently, he has been charging ahead. He's a junior in high school, wanted to do a 4-year university with sports. And he comes and works for either my company or others in the summer. And he's recently going, I might want to look at a trade school, mom. Like, are you going to be okay with that? Where I feel like back generationally in the 90s, we're like, no, you have to go to a 4-year
Yeah.
university. Trade schools were just not seen as something as a standard of success. And he's like, I want to go. I could come out with welding, make 6 figures, not have the 4-year debt. And it's something I really like, because he's a very hands-on individual.
Yep.
I could never see him sitting in an office or a cubicle. He'd go crazy. And so the opportunity is endless now, because the programs for trade schools to really go, I know I'm not going to do that. I want to go and learn this, for women, it's amazing. I mean, far more advanced in opportunities than it was even 10, 20 years ago.
Well, in the takeaway there, I think that you're really you express really really well is know your why for why you're getting into it, right? Because if it's
Yep.
just looked at as a job and it's something that you're doing just to fill the time on the resume now, but you really don't know why you're doing it. That's true for just about any profession. I think really at the end of the day is if you really are serious about your career path, whether it's in construction or something else, you have to understand your motivation and your desire, and it's got to be something other than the paycheck. Because really, at the end of the day, once you get into the flow of business, pay is important. Don't get me wrong, but it's usually not in the top 3 of why people stay or why people leave in terms of organizations. But a lot of times, it's because they really didn't put a lot of time, energy, or effort into understanding why they're taking the job in the first
Right.
place. And
Or they
yeah,
didn't want to. I
exactly.
I was a product of that. I don't feel that the why was emphasized enough. Um, I was going to college and school in the 90s. And so, 30 years ago, it was just, you went to the university and everybody got very, I guess, I don't want to, they got degrees that were very generalized, right? A business degree,
Yeah,
right? Communications degree.
yeah,
They didn't really know what they wanted, but they knew they had to get a degree. And so while that's great, that's discipline, it sets a good foundation, it's not specialized enough to go, what do I want to do? And my
yeah,
parents, they were very loving and supporting, but they never said, what are you interested in? What do you want to do?
yeah,
Now, part of that
yeah,
probably is because neither one of them went to college. I was the first one to graduate university in my family, but I still didn't have some of that structure where they're like, figure out your why. So I'm super intentional with my kids. What interests you? Because the last thing you want to do is go down this path, spend all this time and money, and then go, this isn't what I want to do. And I've seen
yeah.
that. I've seen
Oh,
people
yeah.
who their whole life they wanted to be, I actually have a family friend. They wanted to be a thoracic surgeon. They went to med school, went to Stanford, did all of it, got into the best program, and 2 years in after residency go, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
depressed. I don't like it. I thought I wanted to. After all that time and money, and while that person's fine and they can switch their career path, I often wonder if they would have followed that same trajectory, or if they would have asked that why earlier, if
Yep.
it would have been a less headache, but maybe you don't know until you get there.
Yeah.
And it's not always an easy answer, but if people start with the why early on versus, oh, I should just go to school, what interests me within construction, right? If that's what, we're focused on, I feel like then there's definitely something for everybody. And yeah, it may not be a fit. You may go, shadow somebody. That's another thing I have my kids do
Yep.
is, okay, if this is what you want to do, I'm going to find somebody I know or a business, and you're going to go shadow them for a day and see what a day like in that career path would look like within construction. And it's not sexy, right?
Yeah.
But somebody's going to be building these buildings and painting these buildings, because building for centuries has never stopped, right?
Yep. Yep.
But being an influencer is kind of a new thing. Will it be around in 10 years? We don't know. But I do know the buildings will be standing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
I love that. There's fortitude and longevity there. I like that.
oh, yeah, it's very recession proof.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, I was busier during COVID when everybody else was shut down. So it's a surprising kind of roller coaster ride that has its highs and lows, but it's definitely different than some of the, other occupation norms. Construction really is kind of its own ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. We experienced the same for Owner Insight. I mean, in fact, my CPA literally just sent me yesterday. He's like, "Do you realize how much growth you've had over the last 4 years? I mean, coming out of, the worst pandemic in an environment where everybody had questions." I'm like, "Yeah, but people still build. I mean, business didn't stop in that regard, and it just continued to grow. Which, thank God, for that. Not everybody was as blessed as we both are, but at the end
Yep.
of the day, you're right. I mean, this is something that is a perpetual opportunity, and construction is always needed and necessary. For a woman that's maybe considering construction as a career path, I mean, you've seen it. You and I talked a little bit about it when we did our pre-interview, but in this space, it can be challenging because it is still a fairly male-dominated environment. How do you? What advice would you give a woman that is coming into this space about how to continue to step into their power and make sure that they don't let some of the BS that happens that we know in construction environments actually take place? How do you make sure that that you're prepared and steeling yourself for the environment that you're getting into?
I'm a mentor. I
Yep,
had multiple
love that.
mentors at different stages with different companies in my career, and they helped build my confidence because you definitely have to approach things with confidence and you don't start there. I mean,
Yep,
it's not, for some people, it might be organic, but you're not going to roll into a room of 50 guys and think you're going to command the room. It's a little daunting. And so the
sure.
reality is, but I will say, I can roll into a room of 50 guys and I can command the room now, with no problem. I will,
I
but
love it.
it's not because I have a sassy attitude and a
Yeah,
pencil skirt, right? And
yeah,
I'm turning heads. It's because I show up. I've earned the respect in a certain regard. I'm never disrespectful. I don't definitely want to ever give women in construction a bad name where I'm just coming in from kind of a bitchy standpoint.
yeah,
You
yeah.
really need to know what you're talking about. You need to always be respectful. I always say, let's meet halfway, but I don't ever want to get pushed backwards. And I feel like there are so many times that people's kind of organic approaches to bully or assume you don't know as much as them or that you're there. I've even had people, I'll walk into a room and I own the company and they think I'm there as the PA to take notes,
Yeah.
right? Just based off an assumption.
Yep.
And then feel pretty stupid by the end of it when I hand him my card and it says president.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's a little bit of ego, arrogance. Some of them are just young. They've just gotten out of construction management school, right? Don't know any better. But I would definitely say a mentor, and then just knowing, because everybody has the right to have a seat at the table. I've always said this,
Yep.
but you're going to get there a little bit faster. And, granted, we all make mistakes. I have been guilty of that. But when I show up, I'm very prepared. I'm organized. I have answers to the questions. I'm comfortable in buyout meetings. And when I don't, I sit, listen, and pay attention of how does this go? What's the standard so that I can replicate it? Because it
Yep.
does become a rinse and repeat. Um, Projects in general, no matter what you're in, whether it's in finishing, MEP, um, it is a rinse and repeat. I mean, each building or project or building owner is different, but the concept of everything is relatively the same, right? So you start to get momentum, and then the more mentors I got, they all gave me a little bit different kind of vantage point on something, and I had takeaways. I had a business coach later on in my career, which I never thought I would have, because I thought I knew everything. And then I realized, wow, this was a weak point. I really need to learn how to read financials
Yeah.
a lot better outside of just being a project manager on a project financial, right? What's a
Yep.
business one look like? Because it doesn't always translate well. Reading, things like that. So I have experienced where I've gone in to different meetings where there were other women in the room, and it's kind of disheartening that you can tell they feel like they've got to prove themselves, even to me or other
Yeah.
people. And there's this kind of unsaid thing that there's an uncomfortability that until they get that mutual respect, they really have to kind of sit in the wings or whatever. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that a lot of the women I've dealt with are incredibly intelligent. They're much more reasonable at an approach with things. They're looking to solve a problem versus just bicker because of ego, right? And then just say, I have the final say in this. Because a lot of times, you do have good old boys that come in and their approach is so old school that
Yep.
once they say no, there's no turning back. And it might not necessarily be fair to your team, your business. It's just sometimes it's unethical, you know? So, um, mentors definitely because it helps build confidence. Without confidence, I think that you will struggle with success in the industry because it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
Construction is
Yeah.
definitely hard. I don't think people don't talk about construction and birth being as hard as they really are. Right?
You mean it's not in the brochure? I mean, it's like
No, everybody makes it seem like this magical or but when you really go out and you have beers with some of the people, they're like, man, this is
tough.
a tough line of work, or whether it's a tough owner or a tough
Sure.
project deadline, or you've got a tough subcontractor that you relied on that did you wrong. I mean, there's a multitude of things that can go wrong,
Yeah.
but and every time you start a new project, it's almost like hitting the reset button with new variables every time. So it's
Yep.
you can't plan on that. You can only plan on what you know.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about your why, one of the things that it makes me think of as far as how you show up and the work that you do is, you got to understand the why because that informs your how and then ultimately informs your what, right? And then when you get comfortable, whether you're a man or a woman coming into an environment, when you know why you're there, how you're going to perform, how you can hold yourself accountable to, to show up in a meeting or to handle that off color comment or that abrasive environment. And then
Yep.
ultimately the what is how do I respond and react to that? And how do I show that I walk in and I'm not going to be intimidated or I'm not going to be maligned in any way. And I'm going to walk out of here with everybody's respect. I think that's really critical and
Right.
I see that. I think that I love the fact that you talk about it in a way that says, hey, look, find those people that'll be there to support you, that can help you navigate some of those uneasy situations or some of those difficult job environments. Have a mentor that can say, look, hey, maybe it didn't work out, pick you up, dust you off, get you back in the game, or can help you even strengthen your abilities. Like, hey, you did all right, but how about this? How about that? Right? I think that's a huge takeaway that you just shared. So
Well, the why and the how will then control what the
yeah,
outcome is, right? And then
yep,
you have more control over that. Because, yeah, I'll be honest, when I first came back to some of my first buyout meetings, I was in tears. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy was so rude to me. I didn't know if I was prepared. Like, it was awful. And one of my first mentors was an ex military. He was a Marine, and he was like, you got to have leather skin. You know your numbers better than them. Nobody knows this. You need to ask the right questions. And it was really, like you said, it was a pick you up, brush you off moment. And so you are going to experience this. Nothing's going to shield you from that. But I think as long as it doesn't break you or turn you away or turn you off, you get back up and you do it again. That's where that discipline comes in. And then you slowly start to build confidence that, yeah, I know this building better than anybody else. I know the outcome because I've got my why and my how.
yep. Yeah, and I love you said something earlier too. Is know your stuff, right? Come in prepared. Be, you know, there
Ask
there's a
questions.
yeah.
Always ask
Ask
questions.
questions. Yeah. Oh yeah.
People are afraid to
Absolutely.
ask questions. I've noticed that still.
Yep.
I preach it in my meetings. If you don't ask questions, I'm worried about you. Like,
Well,
because none of us know everything.
it's kind of funny that you said that because one of the things that I've started to do with my team on before we get off most meetings is okay, what question should I have asked that I didn't ask? Because chances are they probably know, right? And that uncovers a different layer of conversation because a lot of times because we didn't go down that that lane or go off in a particular direction with the conversation, people don't say things. And especially in your space, the construction industry is it can be incredibly collaborative or it can be very siloed. And the problem with that is if you don't ask questions, you're just inviting silos of information and eventually it'll come back to bite you.
Well, and
Somebody on that
silos are
project for sure.
then echo chambers that then don't serve any growth.
Yep.
And you've got to have growth tactics in a business, right? So where the company was when my dad owned it, when it was just several million, is totally different than when it was 5 million and then 8 million and then 10 and then 15. And what it is at 15 or 20 doesn't serve us at, 2. So it's you got to have those growth tactics, whether it's growth in your career, growth in your business. Um, yeah, I mean, that's the questions are really important too, because we ask it a lot, even when we lose to a competitor.
Yeah.
Where was our number at? How far apart were we? We were learning the landscape. Why did you choose to go with them? And sometimes you're not going to always get an answer. It depends on your relationship with the contractor, the owner, the client. But so even if you lose, you need to approach it with questions or a
Yeah.
sale, right? If they're like, no, we're just not going to do it at this time, understand why or what their needs are. Because at some point, somebody's going to have a project or a problem to solve. And if you can execute, then, you're obviously going to get it. If you can't, then that's where the failure comes.
Well, and
But
you
so
make a really
questions through the
valid
whole
point.
process are important.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you go back. That's something that I've worked with people on before as well. Is understanding why you lose is almost as important as understanding why you won.
Oh, we give it a
Yeah,
ton of weight.
yeah,
We have a person, one of our coordinators, that she follows up on a monthly and weekly basis until we know, did we win it? Did we lose it? Or is it still coming back around for a project bid? And when you follow it through, we have somebody who's dedicated to say, okay, we lost it. The why. Give us the feedback. So we are huge. That feedback is very critical and the way we adjust going forward.
that's awesome. I love that. Why do you think that your approach to what you do for the business is working so well right now in comparison? And not trying to degrade any of the competition you have. I'm sure it's an incredibly competitive environment because it is in almost every city around, the
It
country.
is.
But,
Yep.
you know, why do you think you're more successful than your next closest competitor?
It is very saturated. It is very competitive, but it always has been. So, in some instances, it's a real relationship, right? It's building a relationship. It does start with the questions of why, the how, the successes, the failures. I mean, I can come back around and work with either a project manager or a GC that, like, we had failures, and I don't hold this grudge. But I think some of it is just the flexibility. So, looking at a strategy, we actually just had a strategy meeting last week. It's being able to pivot. And I spend a lot of time researching and reading what the market does, what our clients are doing. I go to developer meetings. So even though I'm on the farthest side of the spectrum finishing these projects, it's so far, even sometimes years away from the development stage where these people talk. I go to those meetings by invite and listen to what they're saying. So then I can see what's coming down the pipeline in terms of, hey, all the large projects are being put on ice because the financing or the interest rate or the cost of materials is more. And then we come back and we strategize and go, okay, since we know that this is going to be a cold area right now and we need to backfill some revenue, what are we going to do? So then we'll backfill and go, well, we see that they're doing a lot of refresh and rehabs because that's where their budgets are a lot lower. That's where they're putting their money, paint, carpeting, whatever. They're going to update their buildings. They're not going to be building new ones. And so then we redirect to remodeling or things like that. So I think the success comes from being able to pivot, being flexible, not saying, well, we've always done it this way, not pigeonholing yourself into just one area, one thing. We do have strengths with certain genres of projects or buildings, but you've got to be able to say, what's another service I can add? And it comes along with growth strategy. I mean, basically, what is it? When the economy is doing well, you can you add zeros
Yeah.
basically,
Yep.
or you fail. So
Yep.
you're in one of those two categories. And so it's just looking at it through a different lens. And some people either aren't capable of that, their businesses aren't set up for that, or they're just not being led to kind of redirect that way. But I think that flexibility is and then we've always been a conservative business. We don't go out and spend a lot of money on all these fancy trucks and big logos and things. I think in some instances it's necessary, but we didn't start there. I mean, even
Yeah.
after 30 years, we just started buying new fleets of trucks. It wasn't a place we started; it's where we ended after the fact. So I think being conservative too, so that you can be a little bit more flexible,
Yep.
is important because then you're not completely handcuffed to something because you're leveraged so high.
Ah, I love that. I love the approach that you take. I mean, honestly, I could talk to you for hours. I mean, you are a brilliant, brilliant entrepreneur, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I have a handful of ripple oriented questions I want to ask you.
Sure.
But most importantly, I just want to convey my sincere gratitude for just the knowledge that you're dropping here, and your experience and your wisdom, and your approach to saying, hey, look, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? It's a tough
Right.
industry in a space, but I think the women that are actually going to see this and the men get a better and a truer appreciation from someone like yourself that really is been there and done that. You've come from outside the industry, and now you're running a very successful business. So one of my first questions I would ask you is, why are you a successful entrepreneur in your heart of hearts? Why do you think you're successful?
My commitment and dedication. I would be lying if I said there wasn't many times throughout my career, my life, that I wanted to just quit and do something different, or I was like, this isn't for me. And it was just weak moments, whether it's, something personally when you're going through as a mother, something with your kids and you're just like, oh my gosh, or it's professional where you feel like you just have hit a roadblock that you
Yeah.
can't surmount.
Yeah.
And so there have been a lot of times where I had to talk myself on the ledge. Like, no one's going to do that for you. It's got to come from within.
Yeah.
There are a lot of outside influences that certainly help one direction or the other. There's lots of books and things, but at the end of the day, it's you getting yourself out of bed and doing it. And that's at the core of it. There's no magic to it. It's that discipline, and it's little small changes and habits every day that really are the big change, or keep that consistency that what you want to get. And sometimes you have to redirect because, again, what I did in my 20s wasn't what I did in my 30s or what I did in my 40s, and certainly what I'm not going to do in my 50s. So that, I mean, really it's the dedication and the commitment, because it's not always easy. And that's where you have to know your why. Cause I have sat down and really had to say, is this still my why?
Yeah.
And my why has changed a little bit. Now I have a commitment to the people who have worked very hard for me, and I wouldn't want to just walk away. And that's one of my biggest frustrations, is when I do invest in people in my company and they end up going, well, I don't feel like this anymore, I'm going to quit. I'm always like, well, I can't just quit. I
Yeah.
invest in you.
Yeah.
I'm not just
Yeah.
going to quit and say, okay, I don't feel like it today. Nobody has a job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that dedication, because it is hard. And I think sometimes from the top down, people don't see what owners and leaders really have to go through to lead a team, because it can be daunting. Depending on how many livelihoods you're responsible for, everybody just wants to be critical looking up versus, the shoulder strength you really have to have.
You mean I'm not the only one, waking up in the middle of the night worrying about this stuff as a business
No.
owner? Okay.
Yeah, no.
I
No, I
I
think
so
I looked at
identify
my
with
clock
that.
this morning and it was like, well, it was right around when you emailed me about 4:34 this morning. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. See, you're just my sister from another mister. I mean, we have so much in
Yeah.
common. Yeah.
Well,
I,
that, or you get up and then all of a sudden you'll start thinking, and people more often than not, it's become, people are more talking about monkey brain. Like, yeah, I wake up and then
yeah.
I can't, and how to calm that and soothe that.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like you used to have those conversation pieces years ago. So is it, we're in a higher stress kind of environment culturally? Is it because people are more open about it? Has it always existed? I don't really know. That's one of the things I wonder, because my dad used to say, I used to sit awake and be stressed. So I do think that that's a pretty consistent thing when you take
Yeah.
on that role.
Well, and I think, at the end of the day, I do think there is like this shift, right? Because now you and I work in this where business just doesn't stop. It's a 24-hour, cycle, if you let it. And I think really back in the day, like, your dad, my dad, I mean, they likely had these stresses, but they didn't talk about it at that point. There's a certain amount of mistrust in who you let in to share those things, because there is a side of that I think that generation thought might be a form of weakness, or could be used against you in some capacity. And then there's also, not the abundance of choices that people have today as opposed to what they did back then. I mean, you go to work for a company and you'd stay to work for that company
Yeah,
for your
20,
whole
30 years.
career.
You're exactly right. And
And
you really don't see that as much. And if you do, I can pinpoint exactly how old they are.
yeah, I hear you. I know exactly.
Yeah.
No, we could compare notes, but I think they'd be very, very similar.
Hmm.
Um, the There's always somebody who plays a big role in helping us become who we eventually become. Who's that person for you? Who's that person that really stands out as kind of that hero that played an important role in helping you become the Gina you are today?
Gosh, that would be a hard one, just because, my father obviously was a big pivotal point, pushing me and, saying, giving me the structure of non-negotiables and negotiables. But I mean, outside of that, my mentor, his name was Tom. He worked very close with me for 15, 20 years, and was very honest with what I did well, where I needed to work on. And I think sometimes people have a hard time accepting constructive criticism. And, obviously it depends on the delivery.
Yeah.
But I mean, I used to tease him. He was like Rain Man. Like we used to
Yeah.
sit and I'd have a calculator. And so he had a certain part of it that was fun. He really taught me discipline, that not everything's going to be easy. So he had a very, very important kind of part in my trajectory of just knowing that I could do this in my growth. And then kind of the third piece is without my husband, I think outside of the office, giving me advice from a different vantage point of what my strengths were and my weaknesses from a very loving vantage point,
Yeah.
but affected my work. I think that helped my work ethic and just kind of some of my grit. So all of that together, like that trifecta at different points, I think without one of those, like it would have kind of fallen over because
Yeah.
I needed each of those pieces to kind of become who I was, and it helped me because now I still call my dad for advice. I talked with Tom this last week, and I talk with my husband pretty regularly.
Love that.
Not as much as I used to because I wanted to respect the time at home. What started to happen was I felt like I came home and we were always talking about work.
Yep.
And you don't want that either. I mean, I guess one of the other pieces of advice I would definitely give for women in construction is you've got to find balance. I certainly did not have it. And it's an ebb and flow. There's going to be points in your career and in your life where you're going to be up late, longer hours and working to either get to a certain place in that, that project, that career. But then you've got to swing the other way and find that balance, especially if you have kids, if you have a spouse, because otherwise you're going to give so much to work. You're going to give what you have left to, hopefully your kids and your spouse. And then really you don't have a lot left for you. And I think your mental well-being and all of that, that's one of the things that I was pretty abusive with for a lot of my career.
Yeah.
I was hard on myself. And it wasn't until I was older, I learned that I really needed to prioritize that. And so it was kind of that full thing. But yeah, I would say it's those three men that I
Yeah.
think helped give me some balance and perspective that really kind of nurtured who I became.
I love that. You hit it perfectly. I always tell entrepreneurs that I coach, like you need the three-legged stool. You need somebody that, knows you better than anything, tells you like it is, but someone also that brings that level of experience that will help guide and inform how you make decisions, how you handle certain interactions, how you take that constructive criticism, and they can deliver it in a way that basically, they may be telling you you're not doing it right and or you're failing at something. But they can do it in a way that's supportive and in an approach that gets you thinking as opposed to defending, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think the way you framed yours, I think, is fantastic. If you were, I think I might, you might have answered this question already with the Architectural Digest reveal. But what did the 7-year-old version of Gina want to be when she grew up?
I wanted to be a writer.
Yeah,
I wanted to write for a magazine. I think my love and interest for buildings came from, it's definitely, I joke, it's not OSHA approved these days, but back when my father was a superintendent working for another construction company, when he would have weekend work, he'd just throw a hard hat on me and drag me out to the job sites with him. And I would spend a couple hours while he would have meetings milling around these construction sites,
that's
picking
awesome.
up like old conduit and pieces of electrical. And I would just concoct all these little things. And by the end of it, I'd have something made. I mean, one time I even made a watch, like a little like,
That's
and
awesome.
so I started to learn that I loved buildings, watching buildings be built, but I'd always loved writing. And so I think when I was my young 7-year-old version self was like, if I could combine these, it would be architectural digest writing, but then I could study, design and buildings. And um, I really, really thought that that was something that would fun. And then, when I got kind of to there and had a smaller magazine experience, I often wonder if I gave it long enough, but again, I'm a big believer in timing.
Yeah.
There's no accidents. You can argue one way or the other, but there really isn't in life. Like everything kind of goes, you have free will with decisions, but at the end of the day, the events or the journey and the path, the decision is, very definitive. So
Yep. I love that. I love that. Um, if you were able to give one piece of advice, like there's a billboard that everybody drives by on the way to work or on their way home every day, what advice would you put up on that billboard?
Don't underestimate the power of networking and relationships.
I love that. I actually need you on my website for my other company.
um, I mean, I referenced it early before about finding balance,
Yeah,
but that's a very kind of broad cliche statement that a lot of people say. I think that obviously is not a one size fits all, because my balance also is, I have a husband, two kids, but that wasn't the case, when I was in my 20s. So balance looked differently then. But it is prioritizing, your hobbies. And I think people now are doing a fairly good job of it. I almost challenge if they're doing too much of it, where all of a sudden, while I think quality of life matters, they want to work like 6 hours a day. They want to be remote 60% of the time,
yep,
So it's kind of swung the other way. So I caution and I'm careful about how much balance, right?
yeah,
But no, networking. I say that because if you look at it from a couple different ways, if there's something I don't know about a coding or how to install something, I can go through and on my phone, there is at least 10 to 20 people I can call right now and say,
that's awesome.
hey, I don't know this product. What's your experience? What do you charge for a unit cost? Do you know anybody? And right then and there, they're going to give me an answer. I've also, all the Amazon projects that we started doing in Denver came through a contact that I had. It was a company out of New Jersey. I had never worked with them. They were in Denver. We had project bid to a couple of people we did know, and we weren't on their invite list, and we didn't know them, and they didn't know us. And when I found out who was awarded it, I made a couple phone calls of colleagues and said, "Do you know somebody in this?" They happened to know the awarding project manager, their ski buddies. They connected me,
That's
and the
awesome.
rest is history. And that was our first one, and then we got four consequently after that. And it was all because of a networking relationship, somebody I'd met at a conference that was a colleague that I later became. And so that's really important. That, or then, on a local kind of level, if I get myself in a bind and I need to have a subcontractor, I can pick up the phone and there's a handful of people I can call that will come in and help me all day long. And so the power of those relationships and networking is really critical to successful business. And I think sometimes people underestimate that. I know my father certainly did, because he used to talk so much crap to me about, you're spending all these time at things, and like, you're not sitting in front of a computer doing the numbers, and there was a balance in that. And so it
Sure.
takes a while to get that momentum. And, obviously my Rolodex is 25 plus years. So obviously in the first couple of years, it's not as, but it's building those relationships and getting out there. And I think even more now with conferences and networking and podcasts and groups and peer groups, it's easier now than it was to become a part of something.
Yeah, I
So that would
agree.
be my piece of advice, because it's really trajected my career and our business by those relationships.
That's such excellent advice. I really appreciate you sharing that, and it resonates with me so much. And hopefully, our audience understands connections and relationships matter. Whether it's finding your next job, whether it's earning that next opportunity, shifting or changing your career. A lot of that is going to come from the people that you know. And like Gina, you're a perfect example of that. Like the ability to say, hey, I don't know something, but I got people I can go to that do know something that will help me accelerate my time to answer and ultimately make me far more productive. I mean, that all comes from
Mm-hmm.
the power of connection and relationships. So well done. I love that. Last couple of questions. If you were to hear something, or if a colleague or a client were to say something about you, what would you like to hear them say? What would just like totally tickle your fancy to hear them, describe you or explain you to somebody else?
I would, what would tickle me is the recognition of my integrity and authenticity.
Ooh,
I think that there are a lot of people in the business, it's very concentrated. And there's a lot of people that aren't ethical, especially now. It's interesting, in this last couple of years we've heard how people are stealing contracts from each other, and people are going about things the wrong way.
yeah,
And even though I know that that's the way that some people approach things, I never break from my integrity of things. I do what I say. It's important to me. It's the way that we've always run the business. And sometimes that's not always the winning way, right? Like, you don't win things sometimes because people who will cheat sometimes get ahead. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality. Um, but I always stay to the integrity. And then I try to keep my authenticity of my approach is unique. Um, Sometimes I have a little different vantage point. And I like it. I don't try to fit the norm or the mold. And so I think to be recognized for that would make me happy because that's what I strive to do.
Well, I can tell you for the short time I know you, I mean, you come across as someone that is so completely believable that that's how you conduct yourself and what you do in business. I can't begin to tell you just how impressed I am with you and what you're doing and what you're building with your business. What's the other than Start with Why with Simon Sinek? What's the other book that is your go-to that kind of shifted or changed, made an impact for you as you were looking at whether it be a career shift, whether it was, being in the role as the leader that you are for your company? Is there another book that really stands out as kind of being the guide or go-to book that you'd recommend?
Yes. um, I really got a lot from Your Next Five Moves. It's
Ooh,
by Patrick Bet David.
yeah,
It talks about, it kind of blends, right? The why, your strategy. So the next 5 moves, and he actually, funny enough, he just came out with, he just released this Christmas. I mean, within the last week, it's called Choose Your Enemies Wisely. And it's about business strategy for the like audacious. Like it's
yeah,
just, and so I asked my husband, I was like, can I get that for Christmas, please?
that's all.
um, but so your next 5 move is a really good. I mean, obviously, Traction has been a very popular EOS book for many, many years. It's known, it's a system that works for some. I like it, but I sometimes had a hard time. There was parts of it that just didn't resonate with me, right? Maybe I'm not as like, and maybe it comes down to left brain, right brain, and that structure of things. So I really liked it. We used to use it at board meetings. I know that it's a very popular kind of format. And so um, I did have a lot of my team leaders read Traction. I also had them read Extreme Ownership
Yep.
because they needed to understand what their role was and how it goes down. And when, that falls, with the boat, right, you can swap the leader and the team and what fails and what succeeds. So I think those are all really impactful, but they've been kind of popular and been around for a while. I think one of the less known ones is Your Next 5 Moves. I
Yeah.
really enjoy Patrick Bet David as an entrepreneur. I also really love Ed Milet. He's
Yeah.
another one that's
Oh yeah.
inspirational. He has a lot of different, successful athletes, business owners on his podcast, and those are things I get a lot out of. So I listen to those to and from work, and that's really where I go because I sometimes have a hard time in my schedule sitting down and reading books. I'm one of those people who has to reread a chapter a few times.
Me too. Yeah.
But I also, there's something in my DNA that I cannot bring myself to go to everything audible. So I have to have a mix. Like I like
Yeah.
the
Me too. Yeah.
tangibility of having a book in my hand at times and sitting down and creating that space, as well as listening to books on tape and Audible. So it is on both Audible and book, but again, in my DNA, I have to have both formats. So
I love that. I love that. I'm sort of the same way. I'm like old school. I need to underline, highlight, dog ear pages. I want to come back to it and reference it, but then I also
yep.
need, that continual reinforcement through my ears, right? So whether I'm reading a good book inspired by an entrepreneur or a great podcast, I think that's excellent advice on your part for sure.
I do like you can re-listen to the like books on tape, right?
Yeah.
So I listened to one a couple years ago when it came out, and I'm about to start it again because it's so impactful. So I love the book, The Power of One More. It's by Ed Milet.
Yep.
um, you know, one more phone call, one more hour, one more makes the difference.
Yep.
And that's a really good reminder for me at the end of the year, this time of year. I always get back into something habitual. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to start that one. And the best part is I can play it at like 1.5x. So I get through it faster. Right? Like I cheat a little bit.
Spoken like a true entrepreneur right there. How can I do
Yeah.
more with
Yeah.
less, right?
Let's
Yeah.
do this. Yeah.
I love that. All right, my last two questions. When you hear the term the ripple effect, what does that conjure up for you?
Um, it's funny that you say that because I really gave it some thought when I saw how you sign off on your emails, which is like ripple on.
Yeah.
I think the image that completely comes to mind, even the very first time that I saw it or I heard about it or I met you, was me literally throwing a rock in a pond and watching how it goes out.
Yep.
That was like the visual image that came to mind really fast. And so that's exactly what I think of is, you are a starting point of something, and whatever, you cast out or you permeate, it ripples on it. You don't really know how many people it's going to affect neutrally, negatively, positively. Um, but it's just that it's that power of one more ripple, or one more
Yep.
person you talk to, or one more contact. So that's what it makes me think of when I think of ripple on, is
I
just
love
the
that.
impact that it has.
That's a great explanation for sure. What last question? What ripple can I look to create for you, my team or I, or what can we do to support you?
It's a great question. I don't know if I was prepared for that one. Um,
This is why I don't send them out ahead of time, so I get those
so you can
reactions.
plan. Yeah, no, I noticed that, which I actually like. I'm usually one of those people that's like, send out the questions only because I want to make sure that it's a good ROI of the time, right?
Sure, sure.
What is, so the question, what ripple? That's a good question. I'd almost have to come back, but I would probably say just kind of the positive message and how that impacts somebody else, and that if it some way comes back to my business, or my company, or me. I like that positivity. I like that kind of our name, who we are, is out there in some
Yeah.
capacity. Because I always say that if I can change or convince one person to consider a job in construction, or a job in painting, or look at what we do differently versus like just blue collar,
Hmm.
then I think that that impact is worth it, because I had that impression. I always looked at my dad as just a painter, and I was never excited to be like, yeah, my mom works in a district attorney's office as a clerk, my father's a painter. Like, it wasn't anything sexy or prestigious. And so I think the ripple effect is changing kind of the impression that the industry has as a whole would be a positive kind of ripple back.
Yeah, I think, and we definitely want to get you to share, the website and whatnot. But I mean, your company is clearly doing some things, and so I'm happy that we get an opportunity to do this. I'd also love to have you back on my other podcast so that we can further promote you, because you're just so fun and amazing to talk to. I just cannot emphasize that enough. But what you're doing and how you're doing it, um, why you've focused on this, and how you've successfully grown the business, even from where your dad had it to where that you can take it in the future, I think is just super impressive. And I do have a connection in Denver that I'm going to make for you that I think they need to know you for sure. And so stand by for that, and that'll happen. But before I let you go, if somebody was interested in talking to you about a career in construction, or in your specific finishing vertical, or they want to learn about your business and maybe look to bring you guys in for a project, how's the best way for them to learn or connect with you? Learn about the business and connect with you, I should say.
Sure. So email is definitely the best. And my email, our website is www.bell, BELLSPI, which used to be the acronym for Shamrock Painting Inc. Because it's not Bell SPI. But so it's bellspi.com. And then my email is just Gina, um, at.
Okay.
So I'm happy to share it. I don't know if you want to tag it down to where it's easier to kind of see it sometimes versus spell it out. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely, we respond. There, even the info ones, all of the emails where people have my name get back to me in some format or another, even if it ends up at somebody else's kind of email, whether it's the estimating email or info. They're really good. My team is good
Yeah.
about getting them back to me.
That's awesome. Well, we will definitely put that into the show notes, and obviously have it on a graphic when we get this completely edited. But Gina, I cannot begin to tell you how much I appreciate your time today, and just the wit and wisdom that you have. I can see why you are such a successful entrepreneur, and I know that your dad has to be super proud of where you've taken the business, and I am super proud just to know you. So thank you so much for
Oh, Steve,
coming
it's
into
been
my
fun
life.
talking with you. I know
Uh,
you got to let me know when you're in Denver so we can hang out and get some beers.
Absolutely. I am all over that. We're going to do that. But we'll be back again with another episode of Owner Insights Women in Construction series very soon. But until then, guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.